Hello, this is Daoud of Compliance Standards, and in this latest release of the Intel ITAD newsletter dated March the 10th, 2026, we note how the war in Iran is essentially driving up oil, diesel, and freight costs, creating new pressure points for ITADs on logistical cost. We also examine how ITAD companies are marketing themselves where they do best, where they are failing. So first, let me start with the war in Iran, which is, as you know, rippling through energy and freight markets, and ITAD is directly in the path of that shock. In general, we assume that transportation accounts for roughly 20 to 40% of ITAD operations. And now that oil moved into the mid $90 range, diesel is being repriced weekly, and ocean carriers are rerouting ships away from the Gulf and from Suez, adding both cost and time to global trade lanes. Now, for those who are in the IT asset disposition sector and the electronic recycling business, that shows up quickly as higher per mile collection cost, steeper fuel surcharges on line haul and drayage, and of course more expensive export moves for scrap and refurbished equipment, often seen within 1 to 2 billing cycles. Now, those higher logistical costs hit in a business model that we know has long competed on thin movement-centric margins. And so if you are a provider locked into multi-year contracts that doesn't flex with fuel and freight, you should expect more profitability squeeze in the weeks to come. And also in this week's Intel ITAD, we researched how enterprise ITAD providers are actually communicating their capabilities to increasingly sophisticated buyers. We examine how ITAD firms are positioning themselves in the market through messaging, through content, and of course, assessing sort of the go-to-market strategy. And we used those signals to assess the maturity of their commercial narrative. Now, our research highlights the patterns that separate providers with a coherent enterprise-grade story from those still relying on transactional price and compliance-centric language, and shows how that gap is already influencing RFP outcomes. The report is written for those of you who want a structured, evidence-based view of what your own messaging is doing, where it sits on the maturity curve, and what needs to change for that message to be taken seriously at the enterprise level. So in brief, in our assessment, we concluded that most ITAD providers are both under-communicating and are communicating the wrong things. We show that as we start 2026, a large share of the sector still leads with compliance, logistics, and certification language. Well, this is exactly the elements that enterprise buyers now treat as non-negotiable baseline rather than reasons to award business. Overall, the sector's communications maturity, in my opinion, is rated low to mid-tier with a thin top layer of genuinely advanced players. So why is that? Well, roughly half the providers we reviewed are still at what I call awareness and presence. That means basic websites, sporadic press releases, and clearly no identifiable 2026 content. Everything is old. This is, in my opinion, entry-level B2B communication, and that cannot be seen as a serious enterprise posture. About a third have actually reached content and visibility. And by that I mean regular blogs and posts, mainly educational, but still tactical and feature-centric rather than buyer-centric demand creation. Only about 10% operate at demand generation level, and by that I mean using multi-channel campaigns and buyer journey aware content. An even smaller portion, about 5%, qualify as true thought leadership, with original research, analyst relations, and data-backed point of view. And so what that implies is, as a sector, ITAD is operating several years behind comparable B2B service industries on standard marketing maturity frameworks. Most providers still communicate in terms of compliant disposal, logistics, and certifications, table stakes, if you will, rather than risk, sustainability outcomes, ESG outcomes, and value recovery that resonate with the C-suite buyers. A very small set of firms are already using research, ESG metrics, and AI-driven hardware narratives to shape RFP criteria and define what good looks like. They're setting the bar while the majority are either silent or stuck at basic messaging. In other words, the average ITAD provider is still immature in how it communicates, but the leading edge is moving quickly and widening the gap. If you're a client, follow this link, ITAD.com, to access the latest. If you are not, here's my email address if you want to reach me to find out how we can help you.